What would you do if the only thing you could afford was the one place no one else would touch? For 19-year-old Lottie Fenn, cast out and alone in the Arizona Territory of 1882, the answer came in the form of a condemned saloon, bought for $2 and the laughter of the entire town. It was a place sealed by blood and memory, its windows boarded, its door a silent warning. But the truth waiting inside that derelict building was far more valuable and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. A secret bricked up and forgotten. A secret that would rewrite the history of a town built on lies. Settle in and let us know where you're watching from, because this is a story about how the deepest truths are often found in the most forsaken places. Lottie Fenn arrived in Prescott with everything she owned in a single carpet bag and the dust of the Verde Valley staining the hem of her dress. The stagecoach left her in the center of town, a churning street of false-fronted buildings, where the air tasted of grit and mulehide. She felt the eyes of men on her, appraising, dismissing. She was young, alone, and carried the quiet shame of being put out. Her former employer, a rancher named Abernathy with a fat belly and wandering hands, had given her an ultimatum. She had chosen the road. The memory was a fresh bruise, his voice slick with false kindness, turning sharp when she refused him. The door of the bunkhouse shutting behind her for the last time. The long walk to the stage stop with his wife's pitying stare following her down the lane. She had worked for them for a year, saving every spare penny, dreaming of buying a small plot of land, a piece of the world that could not be taken from her. Now her savings felt impossibly small, a handful of coins against the vast, indifferent landscape. She carried a deeper loss, too, one that had defined her entire life. Her father, a prospector named Thomas Fenn, had been gone for 5 years, lost in a cave-in at the Lucky 7 mine. She remembered his hands, calloused and kind, the smell of pine and earth on his clothes. He had been a quiet man who believed in the honesty of rock and the promise buried within it. His death had left her adrift, a grief so constant it had become a part of her breathing. Prescott was his last known town, the place he'd sent his final letter from, full of hope about a new claim. Coming here was a pilgrimage of sorts, a way to be close to the last place he had been whole. She found a room at a boarding house run by a stern-faced woman who asked no questions, so long as the rent was paid in advance. For 2 days, Lottie walked the town, listening more than she spoke. She heard the name of Marshall Brody spoken in low, careful tones. She saw the swagger of the men from the Consolidated Mining Company, their pockets heavy with company script. And she saw the saloon. It stood at the edge of the respectable part of town, a sagging, derelict structure hunched between a blacksmith and an empty lot. Its name, the Gilded Cage, was barely visible on a faded sign that swung from a single rusty hinge. The windows were boarded over with weathered planks, and a notice of condemnation from the territorial government was nailed to the door, yellowed and peeling. The townsfolk gave it a wide berth, their gazes skittering away from it as if it held a contagion. Lottie asked the clerk at the land office about it, a young man with ink stains on his fingers. That place? He'd scoffed, not bothering to look up from his ledger. The old Blackwood place. Been shut for years. Marshall Brody closed it down himself after Blackwood and a drifter killed each other over a card game. Place is a mess. Blood on the floorboards they could never scrub out. Condemned. Lottie felt a strange pull, a kinship with the abandoned building. It was an outcast, just like her. "Is it for sale?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The clerk finally looked at her, a smirk playing on his lips. The town owns it for back taxes. They'd probably pay you to take it." He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "But you can have it for the debt. $2. It was a joke, a taunt. $2 was an insult. It was the price of a thing so worthless it couldn't even be given away. Lottie reached into her reticule, her fingers closing around the few coins she had left. She placed 2 silver dollars on the counter. The clerk's smirk vanished, replaced by disbelief. "You're serious?" She met his gaze, her own steady and clear. "I am." He drew up the deed with a theatrical flourish, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet office. As he handed her the paper, he shook his head. "Good luck, miss. You'll need it." Lottie folded the deed and placed it in her bag. She owned something, a broken, blood-stained, forgotten something. But it was hers. Walking out into the harsh sunlight, she felt a sliver of something that had been absent for 5 years. The faintest glimmer of a future. The saloon was hers. The whispers followed her down the plank sidewalk like stray dogs. She felt them more than heard them, a current of disbelief and mockery that parted the air around her. "Bought the old Blackwood place," a woman murmured behind her hand at the general store. "That young thing? All by her lonesome?" A man leaning against a post spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "More fool her. That place is haunted by bad luck and worse men." Lottie ignored them. She had been the subject of whispers before. They were just noise, like the ceaseless wind that swept through the high desert. She spent her last few coins on a heavy pry bar, a bucket, and a block of lye soap. Practical things. Things with weight and purpose. She walked to the saloon, the deed a small, stiff rectangle in her pocket. The condemned notice on the door was brittle. She tore it off, the paper crumbling in her hand. The wood of the door was swollen tight in its frame. She put her shoulder into it, then again, grunting with the effort. It wouldn't budge. She was about to use the pry bar when a voice, dry as a riverbed in August, spoke from behind her. "That door ain't been opened by man nor beast in 5 years. It's forgotten how." Lottie turned. An old Apache woman sat on a crate in the shade of the blacksmith's awning, a bundle of dried herbs in her lap. Her face was a beautiful map of wrinkles, her eyes dark and knowing. The townsfolk seemed to ignore her, another fixture they had learned not to see. Lottie had noticed her before, a silent observer on the edge of things. The woman's name, she'd heard someone say, was Ilara. Ilara looked from Lottie to the defiant door. "Some doors are sealed to keep trouble out," she said, her voice low and even. "Others are sealed to keep truth in." She held Lottie's gaze for a long moment, an unspoken message passing between them. Then she looked back at her herbs, her part in the conversation apparently over. Lottie pondered the woman's words. Truth. What truth could be in a place like this, other than the simple, brutal truth of a violent end? She turned back to the door, this time examining the frame. Using the tip of the pry bar, she worked it into the gap, leveraging her slight weight against it. The wood groaned, a long, mournful sound of surrender. With a final cracking pop, the door swung inward into a square of absolute darkness. The air that rushed out was stale and thick, smelling of sour whiskey, old dust, and something else. A faint, metallic tang she couldn't place. It smelled of regret. She stood on the threshold, letting her eyes adjust. What had she done? What madness had led her to trade her last dollars for this tomb? Was this just another mistake in a long line of them? Perhaps the whole town was right to laugh. But what other choice did she have? What secret could possibly be worth this ruin? Let us know what you think Lottie should do next in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. For now, Lottie took a deep breath of the dusty, forgotten air and stepped across the threshold into the darkness that was now hers. The first voice of open mockery belonged to Marshall Brody. He found her the next morning as she was wrestling with the first of the boards over the front window. He was a big man, made bigger by the authority of the badge pinned to his chest and the Colt revolver that sat low on his hip. He moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man who had never been successfully challenged. He stopped a few feet away, hooking his thumbs in his belt, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "Well, well," he boomed, his voice carrying down the street. "Heard the town had a new fool. Didn't figure it'd be a slip of a girl." Lottie didn't stop her work. She jammed the pry bar under the edge of the plank and threw her weight against it. The nails shrieked but held fast. "This is private property, Marshall," she said, not looking at him. Her voice was even, betraying none of the fear that coiled in her stomach. Brody chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "Private property? This is a public hazard, is what it is. I condemned it myself. Should have burned it down, but the town council is soft." He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. Blackwood was a troublemaker. Got what was coming to him. This place, it holds on to things like that. Bad feelings. You'd be smart to walk away from it. Sell the deed back to the town for $1. Cut your losses. His concern was false, a thin veneer over something else, a possessiveness, as if he had a claim on the building's ruin. "I paid $2, Lottie said, giving the pry bar another heave. A nail groaned and popped free. "I expect to get my money's worth." "Your money's worth?" He laughed out loud now, a full-throated sound of derision that drew the attention of a few passers-by. "Honey, all you bought is a pile of rotten wood and ghosts. You listen to me. There's nothing for you in there." His eyes, small and hard, scanned the decaying facade of the building. Nothing at all. He lingered for another moment, as if waiting for her to break, to falter. When she simply reset her grip on the pry bar, he shook his head in theatrical pity and turned away. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he called over his shoulder as he sauntered off. The warning hung in the air, heavier than the morning heat. It wasn't a friendly piece of advice. It was an order disguised as one. That evening, Silas, the owner of the livery stable, stopped by. He was a quiet, weathered man who had known her father slightly, and he was the only person in town who had offered a kind word. He'd seen her struggling with the boards and had come with a heavy mallet and a longer crowbar. He didn't speak of the marshal or the town's gossip. He just handed her the tools. "Thomas was a good man," Silas said, his gaze fixed on the saloon. "Worked hard. He talked about you. Said you had his same stubborn spine." He looked at her, his eyes kind. "If you need a hot meal, my wife always makes too much." Lottie felt a knot of emotion tighten in her throat. "Thank you, Silas." "Don't thank me," he grunted, turning to leave. "Just be careful. This town has long memories, and some of them are best left undisturbed." His words, so different in tone from the marshal's, carried their own weight. He wasn't warning her away. He was warning her to be watchful. As dusk settled, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft orange, Lottie finally pulled the last board from the first window. A rectangle of fading light fell into the saloon, illuminating a world of dust motes dancing in the air. The warning from the marshal and the quiet caution from Silas circled in her mind, two opposing forces. One sought to drive her away with contempt, the other to keep her safe with care. And then she remembered the old Apache woman's words. Some doors are sealed to keep truth in. A chill, unrelated to the evening air, traced a path down her spine. A truth. What truth could Marshall Brody possibly want to keep buried in a place like this? With a new sense of purpose, Lottie took a lantern and stepped back inside. The darkness no longer just an absence of light, but a vessel for a secret. The beam from her lantern cut a shaky circle through the gloom, revealing the full scope of the saloon's decay. The air was a physical presence, thick with the ghosts of spilled liquor and cold cigar smoke. A fine layer of dust, as pale as ash, coated everything, softening the sharp edges of the ruin. Overturned tables and broken chairs lay scattered across the floor, like the aftermath of a sudden, violent storm. Shards of glass from shattered bottles and mirrors crunched under her boots. It was a place where all sound had died. Her light found the bar first. It was a magnificent wreck, a long, dark slash of mahogany. Its surface was scarred with knife marks and the dark rings of countless glasses. A section of it was splintered and broken where a body, or perhaps just a fist, had crashed through it. Behind the bar, shelves lay in a tangled heap on the floor. The great mirror that should have been there was a spiderweb of cracks, its silvered surface clouded and blind. Lottie set her lantern down on a relatively stable portion of the bar, the small flame pushing the oppressive darkness back a few feet. She had decided to sleep here, in her own property. She didn't have the money for another week at the boarding house. And more than that, she felt a need to claim the space, to inhabit it and make it hers through sheer presence. Her bedroll, laid out in the cleanest corner she could find, looked small and vulnerable in the vast, haunted room. She ate a dry biscuit and drank from her canteen, the silence of the saloon pressing in on her. Every creak of the old building settling, every skittering sound of a mouse in the walls was magnified. It was easy to believe in ghosts here. She thought of her father, trying to conjure his face, the steady calm in his eyes. He had never been afraid of hard work or dark places. He'd spent half his life underground, reading stories in the rock. He would have looked at this place not as a ruin, but as a project. He would have started with a broom. So she did. She found a worn-out broom in a back storage closet and began to sweep, the rhythmic scrape and whisper of the bristles a comforting human sound against the profound silence. She worked her way from the back to the front, creating a small island of clean floorboards around her bedroll. The dust she swept up was heavy and dark, mingled with old sawdust and the debris of 100 forgotten nights. As she worked her way toward the front, near the door, her foot scuffed against something. She bent down, holding the lantern closer. Carved into the floorboards, almost invisible under the grime, was a set of initials, T.F. Thomas Fenn. Her breath caught in her chest. It couldn't be a coincidence. Fenn was not an uncommon name. But here, in this place? She traced the letters with her finger. The carving was rough, done with the tip of a knife, the way a man might absent-mindedly mark a spot while waiting. A memory surfaced, sudden and sharp. Her father, sitting on their porch, carving her own initials, L.F., into a piece of scrap wood with his pocket knife. The style was the same, the straight, deep cut of the T, the slight curve of the F. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Her father had been here, in this saloon. This wasn't just a random place he passed through. He had sat here, in this spot, long enough to leave his mark. Why had he never mentioned it? His letters spoke of the mine, the claim the hard work. They never spoke of saloons or card games. It didn't fit the man she knew. She sat back on her heels, the lantern light flickering across the rough letters. The saloon was no longer just a derelict building she had bought out of desperation. It was now a connection, a final, tangible link to her father. The place held more than just bad memories and old dust. It held a piece of him. That night, she slept deeply, the ghosts of the gilded cage seeming less like a threat and more like silent witnesses. She was no longer just reclaiming a building. She was searching for the ghost of her father. The discovery of his initials changed the nature of her work. It was no longer just about survival, about carving out a space for herself. It became an act of archaeology, a careful excavation of the past. Each shovelful of debris, each piece of broken furniture she cleared, felt like a question she was asking the silent room. What happened here? Why were you in this place, Father? The next morning, she started on the bar. It was the heart of the saloon, the center of the violence that had shut its doors. If there were answers to be found, they would be near it. The structure was too heavy to move, so she began by clearing the wreckage around and behind it. She filled her bucket with shattered glass, splintered wood, and unrecognizable bits of rusted metal, carrying load after load out to a heap in the back alley. The work was slow and grueling. Her hands, already calloused, began to blister. Her back ached, but the physical labor was a balm. It quieted the noise in her head, focusing her mind on the simple, honest reality of the task in front of her. As she cleared the debris from behind the bar, she began to notice something odd about the wall. Most of the saloon's interior was rough-hewn planks, but this back wall was made of brick, a chimney stack at one end. Yet the section directly behind the center of the bar was different. The bricks were a slightly different shade of red, a bit newer, less weathered than the rest. The mortar was paler, a sandy beige that stood out from the crumbling, soot-stained gray of the surrounding joints. It was a patch, a clumsy, hasty one. It wasn't flush with the rest of the wall. It bulged out almost imperceptibly, a shallow curve in the flat surface. Lottie ran her hand over it. The bricks felt solid, immovable. It could be a simple repair, damage from the brawl that had closed the place. A man thrown against the wall, a few bricks knocked loose and replaced. That was the logical explanation. But it didn't feel right. Her father had taught her to look for the thing that was out of place, the seam in the rock that signaled a hidden vein of ore. This wall was a seam. The memory of Ilara's words returned. Some doors are sealed to keep truth in. This wasn't a repair. It felt like a seal. It was too deliberate, too large. The patch was nearly 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. Who would re-brick an entire section of wall for a minor repair? She set the thought aside for the moment, telling herself she was imagining things, letting the strangeness of the place get to her. She continued her work, focusing on tearing out the most damaged sections of the mahogany bar top, prying up the splintered wood to see what the foundation beneath was like. But her eyes kept drifting back to the brick wall. The color difference seemed more pronounced in the shifting light of the afternoon. The bulge seemed to mock her, a silent, stony secret. That evening, after a simple meal, she didn't unroll her bedding. Instead, she took her lantern and a small hammer she'd found and approached the wall. She tapped one of the bricks in the center of the patch. It gave a dull, solid thud. She tapped a brick on the older part of the wall. The sound was deeper, more resonant, with a faint echo. There was a space behind the new bricks, a hollow space. A cold certainty settled in her stomach. This was not a patch. It was a doorway, a hidden one. She did not act on it that night. The discovery was too large, the implications too unnerving. She needed to live with it, to let the reality of it settle. She laid out her bedroll, but sleep did not come easily. The saloon was no longer just a place of memory. It was a place of secrets, and she felt the weight of them pressing down in the darkness, waiting for her to find the courage to bring them into the light. The next day, she bought a heavy sledgehammer and a cold chisel from the blacksmith, spending the last of her savings. The blacksmith, a burly man with soot on his face, gave her a curious look. "Tearing something down or building something up?" he asked. "A bit of both, I think," Lottie replied. The weight of the hammer in her hands was both terrifying and empowering. This was an act of violation, of breaking and entering into the saloon's sealed past. She stood before the wall for a long time, the silence of the room amplifying the frantic beat of her own heart. This was the point of no return. Whatever lay behind this wall, Blackwood or someone else, had not wanted it found. Marshall Brody's warning echoed in her mind. "There's nothing for you in there." Had he known about this? Was this the nothing he was so eager for her to ignore? Lottie took a deep breath, gripped the sledgehammer, and swung. The first blow was clumsy, striking the mortar joint with a jarring crack that sent a puff of pale dust into the air. The brick held. She swung again, harder this time, putting her back and her grief and her anger into it. The hammer hit the center of a brick with a satisfying crunch. A spiderweb of cracks appeared. The third swing shattered the brick, revealing not wood or earth, but a dark, empty space behind it. A pocket of stale, trapped air sighed out, carrying a faint scent of paper and dry leather. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was right. It was a room. She worked methodically now, using the chisel and a smaller hammer to chip away at the mortar, loosening the surrounding bricks one by one. Each brick she removed widened the hole, letting more light into the hidden space. It was slow, painstaking work. The mortar was stubborn, and her arms ached with the strain. Sawdust and grit filled the air, coating her face and hair. She worked for hours, losing track of time, focused only on the task. The sun moved across the sky, its beams slanting through the dusty windows, illuminating her solitary labor. Finally, the opening was large enough to squeeze through. She peered inside, holding her lantern ahead of her. It was a small, windowless room, no bigger than a pantry. It was an office. A desk and a single chair stood against the far wall. A small cast-iron safe was tucked into the corner, and papers. Papers were everywhere, stacked on the desk, spilling from open drawers, scattered on the floor, as if left in a great hurry. The room was a perfectly preserved moment in time, sealed away from the dust and decay of the saloon outside. Lottie squeezed through the opening, her boots landing softly on the floorboards. She raised the lantern high. The beam fell across a ledger lying open on the desk. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the neat columns of names and figures. The names were a roll call of the most powerful men in Prescott. The mine foreman from Consolidated, the owner of the general store, the land agent. And next to each name, a date and a sum of money. The last entry was for Marshall Brody. The sum beside his name was the largest. It was a book of bribes. Her hand trembled as she turned a page. Tucked into the ledger was a sheaf of letters, written in a cramped, angry hand. She recognized the signature at the bottom of the one on top. Silas Blackwood, the saloon's former owner. She began to read. Brody promises the claim will be ours once Fenn and McGregor are out of the way. He says a cave-in is the cleanest way. No questions asked. The assay report shows they were sitting on the mother lode, and the marshal wants his cut for making it disappear. The lantern slipped in her grasp, the room tilting around her. Fenn, her father, Thomas Fenn. It wasn't a cave-in. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. She sank into the dusty chair, the letter shaking in her hand. She read on, her vision blurring with tears. The letters laid it all out. A conspiracy between Marshal Brody, the Consolidated Mine foreman, and Silas Blackwood to steal her father's claim. Her father and his partner, a man named McGregor, had filed a claim on a small, independent plot that turned out to be richer than anyone knew. The company wanted it, and Brody was their instrument. Blackwood was the go-between, the one who handled the payments and kept the records. But the last letter revealed a falling out. Blackwood was demanding a larger share, threatening to expose the whole thing. The letter was dated the day before the brawl that had killed him. The fight hadn't been over a card game. It had been an execution. The drifter was likely an assassin sent by Brody to silence Blackwood and seal this room forever. She looked at the small iron safe in the corner. If the letters were here, what was in there? It took her the rest of the day to find the combination, hidden cleverly on the spine of a book on the desk. When the heavy door finally swung open, it revealed stacks of gold certificates and, tucked in the back, 2 official-looking documents. They were the original assay reports and the deed to her father's claim, the Lucky 7, signed over to the Consolidated Mining Company 2 days after his supposed death. The signature was a forgery. Lottie sat on the floor of the hidden room, surrounded by the evidence of her father's murder and the theft of his legacy. The grief was a physical blow, a fresh agony that stole her breath. But beneath the grief, a cold, hard anger began to form. They had not just killed her father. They had erased him, turning his life's work into a lie. They had left her an orphan, penniless and alone, while they grew rich on his discovery. The town that had mocked her, the marshal who had warned her away, they were all complicit, either through corruption or ignorance. The saloon was no longer a shelter. It was a tomb, and she had just unearthed its secrets. And now she knew she had to be its voice. A storm was coming. Lottie could feel it in the air, a restless energy that made the dust devils dance in the street and the old saloon timbers groan. It mirrored the tempest inside her. She spent the night in the hidden office, the letters and deeds spread before her on the desk, the lantern casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. She did not sleep. She read and reread, committing every word, every name, every date to memory. The story they told was so monstrous, so complete in its villainy, that it felt like something from a penny dreadful. But this was real. This was her father's life, and his death. By dawn, the anger had burned away the fear, leaving behind a cold, clear resolve. She knew what she had to do, but she also knew she couldn't simply walk to the nearest authority. The highest authority in Prescott was Marshal Brody, the man at the center of the conspiracy. She was a 19-year-old girl with no standing and no allies against the most powerful man in town. Presenting this evidence would be signing her own death warrant. The sky outside had turned a bruised, greenish yellow. The wind was picking up, howling around the corners of the saloon. As she was bundling the papers into her carpet bag, she heard a frantic pounding on the front door. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Had Brody found out? Was he here already? "Hello? Please, is anyone in there?" The voice was a woman's, thin with panic. Lottie crept to the door, peering through a crack in the wood. A family, a man, a pregnant woman, and a small child, were huddled on the porch, their wagon and horses looking panicked in the street. "The storm!" the man shouted over the wind. "It came up so fast. The livery is full. Please, can we just shelter in here?" Lottie looked at their desperate faces. Helping them meant revealing herself, revealing that the saloon was occupied. But turning them away in a storm like this, it wasn't something she could do. It wasn't something her father would have done. She unbarred the door and let them in, just as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. They stumbled inside, shaking and grateful, their eyes wide at the ruin within. "Thank you, miss," the woman said, clutching her belly. "We're the Millers, heading to California." Just then, the saloon door was thrust open again with a bang. Marshal Brody stood on the threshold, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, his face a mask of thunder. He wasn't looking at the Millers. His eyes were fixed on the opening in the brick wall, the pile of rubble and the faint lantern glow from within. He knew. "I warned you," he said, his voice a low growl. He took a step inside, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. "I told you to leave this place alone." The Millers shrank back, terrified. Lottie moved to stand between Brody and the hole in the wall, her small frame the only barrier to the secrets in that room. Her carpet bag, containing the evidence, was on the floor just behind her. "This is my property, Marshal," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You're trespassing." "Your property?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that was swallowed by a clap of thunder. "You own nothing. Blackwood owned nothing. This all belongs to the company." He took another step, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Now, you're going to be a good little girl and hand over whatever you found in there. We can forget this whole thing. You can walk away." The wind shrieked, and the rain began to fall in sheets, drumming on the roof like a frantic heartbeat. This was the test, the moment of choice. She could give him the papers, save herself, and let her father's murder remain a secret forever. Or she could fight. She thought of her father's honest hands, of the initials carved in the floor, of the life he never got to live. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it filled the space between them. Brody's face hardened. He drew his gun. "I won't ask again." Suddenly, the side door that led to the alley burst open. Silas, the livery owner, stood there, a shotgun held steady in his hands. "I think you should be on your way, Marshal," Silas said, his voice calm but unyielding. "This young lady is under my protection, and it seems she has guests." Brody was caught, his fury warring with the cold reality of the shotgun and the three witnesses cowering by the wall. To shoot Lottie now would be an act of open murder, not something that could be easily explained away. He glared at Lottie, his eyes burning with a promise of future retribution. "This isn't over," he spat. Then he turned and strode out into the raging storm, slamming the door behind him. The crisis had passed, but Lottie knew the real storm was just beginning. She had survived the confrontation, but now she had to win the war. The storm broke by morning, leaving the air washed clean and the dust settled. The Miller family, their fear replaced by a quiet awe, left soon after, promising to tell anyone who would listen what they had seen. Silas stayed. He looked from Lottie to the gaping hole in the wall, then back to her face, which was pale but resolute. "Your father," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "He came to me the week before the accident. He said he was on to something big. He was worried." Said if anything happened to him, I should. But he never finished. Never told me what to do. Silas shook his head, a deep regret in his eyes. I should have pressed him. I'm sorry, Lottie. You're here now, Silas, she said, and that was enough. They knew they couldn't stay in Prescott. Brody was humiliated, and a man like that was more dangerous than ever. He wouldn't risk another public confrontation, but an accident in a dark alley, a fire in the night, those were his specialties. The nearest place with any real authority was Phoenix, the territorial capital. It was a 2-day ride. Silas arranged for a sturdy wagon and a pair of mules. While he was gone, Lottie went back into the hidden office and gathered every last scrap of paper, every ledger, every letter. She wrapped them in oilcloth and secured them in her carpet bag. As she worked, an idea began to form, a way to protect not just the evidence, but the truth itself. Before they left, under the cover of the pre-dawn gray, Lottie did one last thing. With a bucket of whitewash borrowed from Silas, she painted a single large word across the boarded-up front of the gilded cage. Truth. The journey to Phoenix was tense. Every rider on the horizon, every shadow on the trail, seemed like a threat. Silas drove the wagon, his shotgun always within reach, while Lottie sat beside him, the carpet bag clutched in her lap. They spoke little, the weight of their purpose creating its own silent language. When they arrived, they didn't go to the local law. They went straight to the offices of the territorial circuit judge, a man named Elias Thorne, known for his stern demeanor and incorruptible reputation. The clerk tried to turn them away, but Lottie's quiet insistence, the mention of Marshall Brody and Consolidated Mining, finally earned them a brief audience. Judge Thorne was a formidable man with eyes that seemed to see right through to a person's intentions. He listened without interruption as Lottie, her voice clear and steady, laid out the entire story. She didn't embellish or plead. She simply told the facts, presenting the letters, the ledger, and the forged deed one by one. She placed the original assay report on his desk last. The judge picked it up, his face impassive. He read it, then read it again. He held it to the light, examining the watermark, the signature, the seal. He was a kind professional, his competence a quiet, reassuring force. He looked from the report to Lottie. "This is your father's hand?" he asked, pointing to Thomas Fenn's signature on the original claim filing. "Yes, sir," Lottie said. He then picked up the deed that signed the claim over to Consolidated. "And this?" "No, sir. That is not his hand." The judge was silent for a long time, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth. The entire future hinged on his next words. Finally, he lowered his hands. "A U.S. Marshal will be dispatched to Prescott by week's end," he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "They will take Marshal Brody and the mine foreman into custody. Warrants will be issued for the others. The consolidated claim on the Lucky 7 mine is hereby frozen pending a federal investigation." It was over. Just like that. The vindication was so sudden, so complete, that Lottie felt lightheaded. As they were leaving, Judge Thorne stopped her. "Miss Fenn," he said, his stern face softening for the first time. "What you have done, it required a great deal of courage. Your father would be proud." News traveled fast in the territory. By the time Lottie and Silas returned to Prescott a week later, the town was transformed. The U.S. Marshals had already come and gone, taking a sullen and defeated Brody with them. The mine foreman was in custody, and the other men named in Blackwood's ledger were in a state of panic. The townspeople who had once mocked her now watched her with a mixture of awe and respect. The word painted on her saloon had become a landmark. People would stop and look at it, speaking in hushed tones. Truth. Lottie had done more than uncover a crime. She had given the town its history back, exposing the rot at its foundation. The story of the girl who bought a condemned saloon for $2 and brought down the most powerful men in the region was already becoming a legend. The change in the town was palpable. The fear that had been a constant undercurrent was gone, replaced by a cautious optimism. Families who had been cheated by Consolidated began to speak to lawyers. Other prospectors felt emboldened to re-examine old claims. Lottie's single act of courage had created a ripple of justice. The Millers, the family she had sheltered, had reached a town down the line and told their story to a reporter for a territorial newspaper. The article, headlined "The Angel of Prescott and the Devil's Due," painted Lottie as a hero, and people began to arrive in town just to see the saloon and the young woman who had uncovered its secrets. Lottie, however, wanted no part of the legend. She deflected the praise and focused on her work, with the gold certificates from the safe, now legally hers as her father's heir. She had the means to properly restore the saloon. She hired Silas to oversee the work, and slowly the gilded cage began to shed its skin of ruin and neglect. She had the main room cleared and cleaned, the broken furniture replaced, the scarred bar sanded down and refinished until the mahogany glowed once more. She replaced the shattered mirror with a new, clear one, but she left the hole in the brick wall, framing it neatly. She turned the hidden office into a small private dining room, a quiet memorial to the truth it had held. She decided not to reopen it as a saloon. The name, the Gilded Cage, felt wrong now. It was a name from the past, a past of corruption and violence. The building was something else now, something more. It was a place of reckoning. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the dusty street, Lottie stood in the doorway of the restored building. The air was cool and smelled of new pine and varnish. Silas walked up, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at the clean lines of the building, the new glass in the windows, the steady lamplight glowing from within. "It's a fine place now, Lottie," he said. "What are you going to call it?" Lottie looked out at the town, at the people walking by who now nodded at her with genuine respect. She thought of her father, of the long journey that had brought her here, of the ruin she had purchased, and the truth she had found within it. She had come to Prescott seeking a connection to her father's memory, and had ended up restoring his legacy. She hadn't just cleaned up a building, she had built a foundation. "I think," she said softly, her voice carrying the quiet moral of her entire journey, "I'll call it the Founder's House." Thank you for staying with us to the end of this incredible story. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest value is hidden right beneath the surface, waiting for someone with the patience to find it. If you were moved by Lottie's journey, please give this video a like and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of hidden history and unexpected triumph. We'll see you next time.